Randy Feenstra was sitting in a new office in Washington, D.C., but he was surrounded by drama. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Congressman Feenstra has a unique perspective. He represents one of the most ag-heavy congressional districts in the country. It's the northwest part of Iowa. He wants his colleagues to support small family farmers, expand exports, and get other regions of the country to sell an E15 blended fuel. That's what he wants to be focused on right now. However, we talked to him right as he was dealing with members fighting over a temporary spending plan, and he was hoping that that fight would not shut down parts of the federal government. There was a lot going on. We're going to begin with something a little calmer, and that's his role representing his neighbors. Hey, can we start with, tell us your mindset when you're in DC. You represent Farmland USA, right, in Northwest Iowa. What kind of responsibility is that for you to represent those folks that don't necessarily get that in some other states that are areas maybe more urban or just don't have the farmland concentration that your district has?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I come from a town of 2,500, grew up as a rural ag kid. And, we see it every day when ag struggles, your main street struggles, your manufacturing, your restaurants, your schools, your hospitals. So everything pivots, especially in Northwest Iowa and around the whole state in essence, right? Everything pivots on the success of that farmer. I feel our nonprofits will say that right away. They can feel that it's a soft ag market right now coming toward Christmas. And where's the giving? Is it happening? And it's sort of slower this year. The same thing with the purchases of new equipment or the new pickup and stuff. They're not happening. So there's this downward pressure. When ag is not performing well, it affects everything. And I've grown up that way. I've seen it. I've seen the ebb and flows of it the other way also. But, and when you talk to people, whether it be a hog producer or a cattle producer, right now, they're going to say different things. Cattle's doing all right, but hogs, these guys are hardly making it. So I've had my ear to the ground and I've lived it all my life.
As we're talking to you, you are working with your colleagues to try to get a farm bill extension. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was thinking we had a conversation maybe late summer. I can't remember exactly when it was. And I thought back then you told me, hey, the way this thing's going to probably play out is you're going to see an extension passed in the lame duck. Am I remembering this right?
You're exactly right.
All right, will you help people understand why does it have to happen after the election's done when you all come back and are working like crazy to try to get done to go home for Christmas? Why does it happen like this?
Politics is in everything. And when you have two parties, right? You have Democrat and Republican Party, and we both want to posture, we both want what we want in the farm bill. For me and for my colleagues, it's what is best for the American farmer. I'm not trying to stereotype here, but typically the Democrats look at the nutritional programs of the farm bill.
And that's where the fight was, right? The Senate Democrats were pushing for that. You all were on the farm side of the House.
So there's this dividing line. And then you also have the House, who is run by the Republicans, and then you have the Senate run by the Democrats. They're in the majority. So now we have to take these two parties, get them together, get the Senate and the House together, and it creates chaos. And that's what we're at right now. So things change. So now we do a 1-year extension to the farm bill. The Republicans now have the trifecta. We have the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And
starting in January.
Right, starting in January. So we should be able to get something done. Now, it's still not easy. And I'll say this to everybody, that ever since the Farm Bill has been done, we've always had a bipartisan Farm Bill. And I still believe that today, is that we will still have a bipartisan Farm Bill, and hopefully we can pass that in February, March, April, somewhere thereabouts. But the good news is we're going to pass an extension. So we go back to the 2018 Farm Bill and extend that for another year.
Is that not crazy to say out loud?
Yeah, it is.
Because this is kind of like a re-extension, right? You already extended it once.
It is. It's the round and round and round we go. And the problem with that is the things that are happening today, real life situations that are happening in our farming communities. I'll give you one, avian bird flu. You know, we just
Hmm.
lost another 5 million birds in Northwest Iowa, 20 million over the last year. We need dollars. The other thing is, if you look at our commodity prices, whether that be corn and soybeans and stuff like that, there's really no new trade that has happened. And there's new trade dollars in this farm bill to expand trade, to create more markets for our commodities. And if you don't do that, we continue to we have low prices because we have these massive surpluses of grain. So we got to find avenues to get rid of it, and that's through our export markets. So that's why this farm bill is so important. And the further we wait, the more problems we continue to grow.
Will you talk about that bird flu a little bit? Because you're talking, I was just talking actually earlier today with the Secretary of Agriculture, and it's kind of sparing no victim here, hitting chicken, hitting turkeys. How what needs to be done? Where the producers, what kind of help do they need?
Yeah. Number one, we need more biosecurity. And what has happened, and I see this more in Northwest Iowa, we have dairy. And so whether it gets infected by the dairy or it gets infected
Hmm.
by the birds, the chickens and the turkeys, you know, it just spreads. And that's the cause. So you have the feed truck coming on the yard, you know, giving the birds feed or whatever. It may have just came off a cattle yard or a dairy yard. And so we got to figure this out. I mean, we got to figure out what's happening and try to prevent it. We also need the Null lab in Iowa State to figure out what solutions can we have. And right now, there's just not dollars there to figure out the solution. And that's why it just repeats itself over and over and over again. And we got to get to the point of trying to figure out a true solution. And you know, I just feel right now, so obviously it's in dairy, it's in birds and turkeys, but in Washington, it also got into hogs. And you start getting into hogs, this could be a whole game changer. I mean, we were worried about African swine fever, but bird flu could have the same outcome. So I know Iowa State University is looking at this, worried about it, but that's the next aspect of this whole flu.
As an outsider, 2025 to me, for you, with everything you're part of, so you're part of House Ag Committee, part of House Ways and Means Committee, you're now on this new Doge caucus for House Republicans as well, this kind of pseudo department, but this Department of Government Efficiency. So you're looking at trying to save money. You're in a fascinating position, right? Because you see back home the need for producers. You also feel the pressure of, hey, we gotta cut costs here, save some money, and then on the tax side and everything else with Ways and Means. But I mean, that's quite a stew pot here, right?
Yeah, it is. You need to prioritize dollars. I'm the only one in Congress that sits on both ag and Ways and Means. So Ways and Means handles all tax, downward pressure on tax right now because the farm, you know, is just not doing well. And it also handles all of trade, and we have to open new trade markets. And then I sit on the ag committee that handles the farm bill. So it all coalesces together, which is good for myself because I can add expertise in all these areas. But we have a lot of, you know, we have a $35 trillion deficit. So we're trying to figure out, all right, how do you manage some of these farm issues and even tax issues, the death tax and other, you know, like kind of exchange, depreciation, all this other stuff. And yet, how do you not increase your debt? And for me, it's all about, okay, all right, let's look at this. Can we expand our trade markets to grow our economy, to make sure that farmer is more successful? All right, can we also give them incentives through the tax process of making sure that, you know, they can pass that land on to the next generation? So all these things are simultaneously going on together, but for me, I'm in the perfect situation to help Iowa in the fourth district and be that loud voice and getting this stuff done
Yeah, but doesn't one position fight with the other?
all the time. All the time. But the great thing is then being on Doge that we can cut and not duplicate some of these programs that are occurring. So it does bring benefit. They ask me all the time in Ways and Means, hey, what is the ag community saying about this? And so since I've been in the ag committee, I can talk firsthand about what we need to do and what drives our economy and what doesn't.
So, what are your conversations with colleagues like who, frankly, don't have much farmland in their house district? Is there a curiosity by your colleagues to ask you, "Hey, what's going on here? What do I need to know?" Or are they so far removed from it, it's just not really top of mind for them? Like, what are your talks like?
It depends who they are, but I
Okay.
have had a great open invitation to the Iowa State Fair. And this past year, I brought the whole Ways and Means Committee to the Iowa State Fair and said, hey, I want to show you what taxes do to the farming community. I've had a lot of my ag committee at the Farm Progress Show, including my chairman, G.T. Thompson, to show him what we have in Iowa at this Farm Progress Show and the new innovative things and the creativity and what can happen in the farm sector. So every day, I'm telling our story. And then finally, you look at biofuels. A lot of people, hey, I'm a liquid fuels guy, they say, or liquid fuels member. All right, what does that mean to you? Well, it's petroleum. It's like, no, we've got to walk hand in hand with liquid fuels. That means biofuels and petroleum together. And everybody's starting to get that. I work with the refiners on an everyday basis because they get it. They want to be part of biofuels too. So again, it's continuing that conversation with all these entities and all these stakeholders to make sure they understand how important Iowa and American agriculture is.
What do you see the future in 2025 for E15?
I'm so excited. I mean, we are just approving, and it's going to be approved here by the end of the year, that year-round E15 is going to happen. It'll be there. So that's nationwide. I think the rest of
And it's limited right now.
it is. It's limited to 6 states. So this is a game changer for me. We've been working 6 years on this, and finally I got it in a bill that's passing. And then to me, this is one great thing. And again, working with the refiners, working with the petroleum industry, working with my Texans, Kansas, Oklahomans to say, this is good. This is not going to hurt your industry, but we've got to work together. And I look at it and say, I also want to work on some of the regulatory issues that are preventing petroleum and drilling from happening. So if we can walk hand in hand, it helps helps everybody, the farming community, and our economic growth for our nation.
Can you put into context what nationwide E15 will mean for producers when you're talking about going from just that select 6 states now?
Yeah, it's a long-term economic growth. I mean, now the next step is making sure that every state has it at their pumps year-round. So now that's the next step for a lot of the biofuels organizations. I give them the ability to do this. And we're talking probably we can double or triple the amount of ethanol that we're currently blending and using. So you think about where the commodity prices are right now with corn, $4.40 thereabouts. This could, increase them by $1 or whatever it might be. So,
So you really think double or triple? It'll be that substantial?
I think again, it's about marketing. We got to market it, but you can sell that ethanol for a lower cost than regular petroleum. So there's a great advantage here. And then obviously there's aviation fuels that we're working on too. So we have to figure out a solution with the excess crops that we have in corn and soybeans. And that's what I'm trying to do every day. And obviously ethanol being part of that. And then, doing other things through sustaining aviation fuels, open the export markets. So we can keep those commodity prices up there. That helps our main streets.
Will you talk about the recovery in your district earlier this year? Part of your district got hammered by the awful flooding. And of course, that's happened there. And then we've seen hurricane in the southeast. What is disaster recovery like, particularly on the ag side?
Yeah, so it's always tougher on the ag side because it just depends if you have insurance for some of these things. Quite often it doesn't, but we learned even with the duration, it takes 2.5 years to get funding dollars for some of these things that have happened. Now, we've tried to push that agenda. We had the proclamation of disaster area, which I applaud our governor. I mean, Governor Reynolds did an incredible job. We had that within days after the floods in western Iowa, where it took South Dakota, months. So we got those dollars fairly fast. Recovery has happened for most of these communities. We're still trying to find temporary homes are there, but permanent homes for a lot of these people. But for the ag markets, I think they're back up and running. I mean, I think a lot of our farmers have come back around. The question is, now they got to plant here in the next couple months. All of a sudden, 4 months from now, they're planting in March. And hopefully they get that operational loan to do that. But that's why we've created a disaster fund, a supplemental that's passing here in the next days to help them out.
Can you circle back to something you talked about at the onset, that when farmers are struggling, what it does to that smaller community is you kind of look forward, and as you well know, in the state of Iowa, about 2/3, if not more, of the counties have been shrinking in population, some for decades, frankly. And I know that's not a phenomenon that is foreign to some other states. They're dealing with some of that as well. And I guess I'm thinking, where you grew up, you mentioned Hull's about 2,500 people. What's it going to take how do we build out some of these smaller communities? What's it going to take? And is there something you feel like you all can do in the next Congress to aid that?
Well, first of all, you got to address the problem. And the problem right now is really a sluggish economy in the ag economy. You look at John Deere, Kinsey Planter, and then you go down the manufacturing. Every small town has a little manufacturer that's spinning parts for one of these companies. And so the massive layoffs are happening. And when those layoffs happen, obviously, you don't have people buying goods on that main street. So to me, it really starts by opening up your commodity markets and stuff like that, which we just talked about through trade and biofuels. But I also believe is that farming is changing. Farming is changing very fast, and that we've got to look at the new technologies and have our farm kids going to the community colleges, learning these new techniques of farming. To me, it's all added value. When you start using that technology to plant, to understand fertilizers, to understand pesticides and all this other stuff. So we can keep these kids local. And then once you keep them local, whether that be at the local elevator, whether that be at the local manufacturer and all this stuff, then you start growing your community. I was city administrator of Hull for 8 years, and it's fighting like ever to try to keep our students in Iowa and keep them growing in Iowa, where they create that family, where their kids are that next generation. And I think over the years and decades, we've really lost that, where our kids go to the universities and stuff like that, and then they exit out to somewhere else in the United States. And there's incentives now. You think about the problems that I hear from rural communities. Obviously, workforce housing is a big thing. Daycares are another big thing that we're working on to make sure that these kids, these new young people, have a quality of life, that they can grow a family, that there's a place to go for them. So these are all issues, I think.
Not to make this too generic, but do you see, with Republicans controlling essentially the trifecta starting in January, do you see maybe a mentality switch, in that there will be more of this kind of block grant mentality, sending the federal dollars to the states, like you mentioned, childcare, housing? Is that better addressed? You used to be a state legislator in Iowa. Is it better addressed at the state level than feds?
Yeah, I tell you what, at the federal level, we don't know what makes things tick in Iowa. We don't know what makes things tick in rural communities. And that's why I'm such a proponent of pushing the dollars down in block grants to our schools, to our communities, to our transportation. They know where it needs to go. And so there's this big push to try to decentralize some of these dollars. I think of Department of Education, of saying, hey, what happens if we give the dollars to the states and let the states decide, and instead of having all the strings attached that always happens at the federal level. We see that through dollars that also go to transportation and also to housing and stuff like that. Hey, let's get the strings off, let the states decide, and that money will go a lot further. and it'll create better outcomes. I think that's the philosophy of the Republicans right now.
And can you get into the weeds there? How does that process work? So how do you do something that the whatever federal entity used to do? How do you change it to block granted so that it can go to the states? Is that a complicated, cumbersome process?
You got to change policy. I mean, it starts in committee,
Okay.
and the key is to create the rules to do it. I think of community development block grants. We did this years ago, where we block grant dollars that can be used for housing and daycares and infrastructure. That's what we have to do also for education and transportation and things like that. Um, it does. You got to think through to make sure that the money is spent correctly
Hmm.
without too many strings attached. But I just think that the state knows best of how that money needs to be spent compared to the federal government. So I think you will see a lot of this in this administration, of the Trump administration, uh, decentralizing a lot of the dollars at the federal level.
And how does it work when you're talking about prioritizing our tax dollars? So let's say we need to do a little bit more to help smaller communities. They need a little extra help, extra edge, what have you. Is it that simple, or is it, can you define it so
Right,
locally like
right.
that? Does that
You
make
can,
sense?
and I'm very engaged in that, especially in the healthcare arena. I mean, you think of our hospitals that are
Hmm.
closing at an alarming rate, our maternity wards are closing. So there's actually data, and in a lot of rural America, there's tremendous amount of data, of manufacturers closing and stuff like that. So you can use the data and say, all right, this is where X is struggling, and then you can put parameters around your block grant dollars, saying this is where the dollars is going. It's going to rural America. Well, what does rural America means? It might be a county of 20,000 or less, or it might be as drilling down to a community that has 10,000 or less people. Again, you don't whimsically throw those numbers out. You figure out through your statistics what will best serve that rural area. So you can put parameters on some of these dollars coming down to the states.
This is an insensitive question asking the guy who used to help as a city administrator in Hull, but what what is a viable population for the future?
A tremendous question.
And I know that's offensive to people
It,
if you live
it,
in one of these
it
smaller
is.
towns.
All I can say is, it really schools dictate it. I always think that when you lose your school in a community, it's hard to have a community. It's hard to have services. It's hard to have that drugstore, hardware store, grocery store, bakery, and stuff like that. And I won't put a number on it, but I think everybody understands that. And that's why there's always a fight never to close a school, because that is, to me, part of a death nail to a community. But I've seen a lot of communities from 500 to 600 population to 5,000, and they have a unique situation. Maybe they have a special restaurant that everybody comes to from the county and stuff like that. And I just think whatever the community is, you have to think outside the box. What can we do to draw people in and then grow? And it takes one step at a time to slowly grow that base. And I know when I was in the city of Hall, we were at 1,500, and now we're at 2,500. So we grew over 1,000 people over the last 20 years. So there's ways to do it.
Well, your family did your part.
Yes, we did. We got to propagate too. That's a great good point. Very well said.
That's
Keep them
true.
around.
Hey, will you close out? We talked about ways and means. I want to go back to that a little bit. So as you look ahead to 2025, what are some of your tax priorities?
Yeah. So the big thing, especially when you look in rural Iowa, is it's the death tax. I was a big proponent of this at the state level. We got it done at the state level. We got it removed. But when you think of the death tax, it's a tax. If you die, if you got to pass that land on to that next generation, that you got to pay up to 42% tax. That's unbelievable. So we're trying to get rid of that. And then there's also uh, uh, 199A to help small businesses, help small farming businesses and stuff like that. That's a 20% pass through, which is very big. There's also the standard deduction that we've doubled for families.
Hmm.
It actually doubled. It went to 12,000 per individual, 24 for families. Massive. That goes away. And then there's also a depreciation. So you can depreciate an asset. So you buy a tractor or a vehicle, you can depreciate that right away that first year. That's so big, so you don't tie that money up for a long term. That's called 179 depreciation. So, and then finally, the child tax credit. I've always been a proponent of child tax credit It's, you know, you have to work and you get a credit for your children that you have. And again, that money goes back into the economy to grow that community. So, and we doubled that tax credit over the years. So Reagan started that, by the way. So people always say, where did that child tax credit happen? Well, it happened under Reagan way back there. So.
And you feel like that's still that's something that will be continued in this
Yeah,
next Congress?
absolutely.
For
It'll
sure?
be continued. It might be modified, but to me, it's
Okay.
important especially for small rural communities that you have struggling families that can use those tax credit dollars.
All right, close us out with a priority that you're going to be focusing hard on in 2025.
Yeah, well, the big thing that we have to do is we've got to grow our economy, and to do that in rural America is we got to open trade markets. Number one, we have to expand ethanol production, and then we also have to make sure that we lower taxes and make sure that there's more money going into the economy, and then pass that farm bill. We've got to pass the farm bill and help our farmers out, especially when it comes to reference prices. That's the low end of where they can get help, and we got to extend those and grow those and keep that crop insurance going.
Now, you know, you got producers in your district sweating out all this talk about trade wars and tariffs and all that stuff. How do you as a member of Congress make sure that doesn't go too far and get too crazy?
Well, it's pretty interesting. Watch this, you know, everybody has a little angst, obviously, with tariffs and stuff like that, but it's all about leverage. And we saw this just a month ago where Trump said, I'm going to put a 25% tariff on Mexico and 25% tariff on Canada. And then you had President Sheinbaum from Mexico right away get on the horn with Trump and say, hey, what can we do to help? You had Trudeau go down to Mar-a-Lago. So that's called leverage. It works. And so all I could say is, you know, let's just keep our feet on the floor and we'll manage this. And, you know, obviously we got some issues with corn and GMO in Mexico. I'm sure that will get resolved right away. We have an ethanol tariff issue in Brazil that will hopefully get fixed. So I'm pretty excited where this is all heading.
Congressman, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. We appreciate the time. Merry
Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone, including you. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you. You can learn more about Congressman Feenstra's background and his previous career by checking out our profile piece about him. You can find that in the American Farmland Owner Weekly Newsletter. It's the place where landowners get their news. Just go to AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for reading, thanks for joining us here, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmers.